China just won the global battery war. And it's not because their cars are cheaper. It's because they completely rewrote the physics of how a battery gets made, while America was busy building bigger ovens. Let me say that again. In the second quarter of 2026, BYD delivered 55,700 pure electric vehicles. Tesla delivered 48,000, that's a 7,000 vehicle gap in a single 3-month stretch. And this isn't a one-off. BYD already took the annual crown in 2025. They are not just winning, they're pulling away. But here's the part that makes this story genuinely wild. Tesla just spent 7 years and $2 billion to crack one of the hardest manufacturing problems in industrial history. They figured out how to make a battery without using toxic liquid solvents. You'd think that would be their victory lap, right? Finally, after all that time and money, they can cut costs, shrink factories, and dominate. Instead, BYD dropped a battery that charges from 10 to 70% in 5 minutes, in freezing cold without catching fire. And they did it with cheaper materials and less R&D drama. So who's actually ahead? The answer is way more complicated than a sales chart. And it's going to determine not just who sells more cars, but who controls the global energy grid for the next 50 years. You need to understand what we're really fighting over here. For the last 30 years, every lithium-ion battery on the planet was made the same miserable way. Imagine trying to bake a cake, except your flour is toxic. Your oven is the size of a football field, and you have to capture all the smoke and turn it back into liquid just to stay legal. That's the old battery manufacturing process. You take your active materials, lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and you mix them with a binding agent. But that binder won't dissolve unless you dump it into this incredibly nasty solvent called NMP, N-methyl-2-pyrrolidone. It's toxic, it's flammable, and it's expensive to handle. You turn that mixture into a wet slurry, spread it onto a metal foil like peanut butter on toast, and then you run that foil through massive ovens. We're talking football field length ovens. To evaporate all the solvent, then you have to capture those toxic fumes, condense them, recycle the solvent, and pray nothing goes wrong. That whole process takes up half your factory floor, eats up insane amounts of energy, and adds a huge chunk to your production cost. But until a few years ago, nobody could figure out how to do it any other way. Tesla's big idea was brutally simple. What if we just skip the liquid entirely? Instead of mixing powders with solvent, you just take dry powders, the active material, the binder, the conductive additives, and you press them together using mechanical force. No ovens, no solvent recovery, no toxic waste. Just powder, pressure, and a finished electrode. The math is almost too good to believe. Factory footprint shrinks by 50%. Equipment costs drop 40%. Energy consumption plummets 70%. And the battery still works really well. Tesla's new 4680 cells with fully dry electrodes, both anode and cathode, have been running in Model Ys since early 2026. After 2,000 full charge-discharge cycles, which is roughly 10 years of normal driving, they still retain 90% of their original capacity. That's better than most wet process batteries can claim after half that many cycles. So why isn't Tesla already running away with the whole market? Because there's a catch, a chemical catch. See, when you press dry powders together, they don't always stick the way you want. You get weak spots, and weak spots in a battery mean inconsistent performance, lower yields, and the kind of reliability headaches that make production engineers cry. Tesla spent 7 years solving that problem. They nailed it, but while they were fixing the kitchen, BYD fixed the recipe. BYD didn't just sit there and watch. They took a completely different path. Instead of obsessing over how to build the battery, they obsessed over what the battery is made of. In March 2026, they unveiled the second-generation Blade battery. They took their already legendary lithium iron phosphate chemistry, the one that literally won't catch fire even if you stab it with a nail, and they added manganese and silicon, and they pushed the voltage from 3.2 to 3.8 volts. Energy density jumped 35 to 50%, landing at 190 to 210 watt-hours per kilogram. That puts it right in the same league as expensive nickel-cobalt batteries, but without the expensive metals. And then they did something that really scared Tesla. They made it charge at absurd speeds. At room temperature, you can go from 10% to 70% in 5 minutes, 10 to 97% in 9 minutes, at minus 30 degrees Celsius. That's seriously cold, like a winter morning in Chicago. It takes 3 minutes longer to hit 97%. Think about what that does to the whole driving experience. Range anxiety stops being a thing. Waiting at charging stations becomes a quick bathroom break. BYD didn't just improve the battery, they improved the entire ownership experience. And they built the infrastructure to back it up. By mid-2026, they had over 7,000 flash charging stations across China, stretching from the Russian border all the way to the Himalayas. They even partnered with Sinopec to plop charging stations right next to gas stations. By the end of the year, they're targeting 20,000 of those. That's not just a tech play, that's a land grab. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. BYD's chairman, Wang Chuanfu, was brutally honest about it, he said. And I'm paraphrasing. This year, our sales are limited by how many batteries we can make. The factory in Xi'an is cranking out 16 gigawatt-hours annually, enough for about 700,000 cars. They're adding 2 to 3 gigawatt-hours every single month, but demand is growing even faster. The Song Ultra EV alone had over 100,000 orders within weeks of launch, and they delivered 58,000 by July. The bottleneck isn't demand. It's never been demand. It's the factory floor. And that's where Tesla's dry electrode breakthrough actually gives them an edge. Because if you can build a battery with half the equipment and half the floor space, you can scale faster, even if your chemistry isn't as flashy. So right now, we have two completely different philosophies colliding. Tesla is betting on manufacturing innovation to win the cost game. BYD is betting on chemistry innovation to win the performance game. But neither of them is playing the long game that actually matters. Because the real future of batteries isn't about eliminating ovens or adding manganese. The real future is about eliminating liquid entirely. Let me walk you through why liquid is the real villain here. The organic liquid electrolytes used in every single EV today have three fundamental flaws. First, they're flammable. If the battery gets too hot, either from fast charging or from a crash, that liquid can ignite. Second, they allow something called lithium dendrites to grow. Dendrites are like tiny metal spikes that form on the negative electrode during charging. If one of those spikes grows long enough to pierce the separator and touch the positive electrode, you get a short circuit. And that's usually followed by thermal runaway, a fancy way of saying fire. And third, liquid electrolytes thicken in cold weather. At minus 20 degrees Celsius, the viscosity increases so much that lithium ions can barely move through it. Your battery capacity can drop below 50%. You've felt this if you've ever owned a phone in winter. 3 defects: flammability, dendrites, cold crippling, and they all trace back to one thing: that puddle of liquid inside the cell. That's why solid-state batteries have been the holy grail for the last 2 decades. Take out the liquid, replace it with a solid ceramic or polymer, and in theory you fix all 3 problems at once. No fire risk, no dendrite piercing, no thickening in the cold. Plus, you can pack more energy into the same space, because solid electrolytes don't need the bulky separators that liquids require. The energy density numbers are mouthwatering. Lab prototypes routinely hit 400 watt-hours per kilogram, and some even push 500. That would give you 1,000 miles of range on a single charge. But there's a reason you can't buy a solid-state battery today, and it's not because companies are lazy. It's because solid electrolytes have their own nightmare physics. Think of solid-state electrolytes like concrete pavement. It's rock solid until temperatures change. Then it expands, contracts, and cracks. Now imagine lithium metal is water seeping into those cracks. When winter hits, the water freezes, the cracks get bigger, and your beautiful concrete highway turns into a pothole disaster. That's what's happening inside every solid-state prototype. When the battery charges and discharges, the electrodes expand and contract. That's normal. But when you press a solid electrolyte against moving parts, it cracks. Microcracks form, like potholes in a frozen road. Those cracks then become pathways for lithium to creep through. And before you know it, you've got dendrites growing inside the solid material. So you're back to square one, short circuits. Only now they happen inside a rigid block instead of a liquid pool. And because solid electrolytes are brittle, manufacturing them at scale is a nightmare. You have to keep everything perfectly clean, perfectly aligned, and perfectly pressed together. One tiny flaw in a factory that produces 1 million cells a day, and your whole yield drops to nothing. That's why Toyota, who promised solid state by 2026, quietly pushed their timeline to 2028. That's why CATL is targeting 2027 for small-scale trial production, with mass production not expected until 2030. The industry has been chasing this ghost for 20 years, and every year the goalpost moves. So when you hear headlines screaming, solid-state batteries are here, check the fine print. They're never here. They're always 3 years away, and they have been since 2006. So what do we actually get in 2026? Semi-solid batteries, they're not full solid state, but they replace a chunk of the liquid with solid materials. Dongfeng is rolling out a semi-solid cell at 350 watt-hours per kilogram. CATL's condensed battery hits 360, and BYD's own semi-solid prototypes have passed durability tests and are expected to enter small-scale production in 2027. These batteries give you 50% more energy density than current liquid cells. They handle cold much better, and they still cost less than you'd think. The industry is calling 2026 the year of semi-solid, and they're projecting 60 to 70,000 vehicles with semi-solid batteries this year, mostly in the second half. That's real progress, but here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in marketing wants to admit. Even semi-solid batteries still have liquid inside. They're a halfway house. They're not the revolution. They're a stepping stone. And that stepping stone matters more than you'd expect, because the gap between good enough and perfect is shrinking every single year. The real breakthrough isn't waiting for perfection. It's learning to make good enough cheap enough. Tesla's dry electrode is a perfect example. They didn't solve the chemistry problem, they solved the manufacturing problem. And manufacturing is what actually gets products into people's hands. BYD, on the other hand, solved the chemistry problem for today's materials, but they still use wet processing, which means their factory footprint is bigger and their energy consumption higher. Neither company has a clear knockout punch. They're both betting on different horses, and the race is far from over. But here's the part that really flips the script. This isn't just about cars, it never was. The same batteries that power your EV are being stacked into shipping containers. To power entire neighborhoods, grid-scale energy storage is exploding. In 2025, Tesla installed 46.7 gigawatt-hours of storage, up nearly 50% from the year before. In July 2026, they inked a massive deal with Abu Dhabi for another 15 gigawatt-hours. That's enough to back up a small city for a day. But BYD just passed them as the #1 storage integrator globally. They signed an 11 gigawatt-hour deal with Masdar, the UAE energy giant. And here's the weird twist. BYD's battery division signed a deal in March to supply cells to Tesla's own Shanghai storage factory. So BYD is both Tesla's biggest rival and its supplier. That's how tangled this market has become. Now the macro picture is even more stunning. In the first quarter of 2026, global grid-scale storage shipments hit 103.7 gigawatt-hours, growing over 60% year over year. The top 10 integrators control about 70% of that market. But the rankings are reshuffling every quarter. Tesla used to be the undisputed king. They sat on that throne for 3 years, and now they're #2. And the reason is simple: cost. Whoever can produce the cheapest, most durable batteries wins the storage game. Because when you're stacking thousands of cells into a container, even a 5% cost advantage becomes millions of dollars in savings. That's why BYD's vertical integration matters. They control the mining, the refining, the cell production, and the pack assembly. Tesla is more reliant on suppliers, which gives them less control over costs. But Tesla has its own ace in the hole. The dry electrode process also applies to storage cells. If they can scale that technology to their megapack production, they could undercut everyone on price. That's the bet they're making, and they're not wrong to make it. The energy storage market is projected to grow to over a terawatt-hour per year by 2030. That's 10 times the size of today's market. Whoever captures that growth will be the next Exxon, the next Saudi Aramco. So when you watch Tesla and BYD slug it out over quarterly sales figures, you're actually watching a proxy war for the future of global energy. And that future extends beyond cars and grids. It extends to data centers, and AI is gobbling up electricity like there's no tomorrow. A single training run for a large language model can consume as much power as a small town uses in a week. Data centers are already straining local grids. Battery storage is the only practical way to smooth out demand, to store renewable energy for peak usage, and to ensure uptime when the grid wobbles. So the next frontier for battery tech isn't just range or charge speed. It's reliability under continuous heavy cycling, deep discharge, and variable temperatures. That's the same set of challenges that EV batteries face, but amplified by an order of magnitude. Because data centers run 24/7, not 2 hours a day, their batteries need to last 10 years of near-constant use. That's why the longevity numbers we talked about earlier, 90% after 2,000 cycles, are so important. They're not just good for your car, they're good for the cloud. So where does that leave the ordinary consumer? In an incredibly fortunate position, actually, because while Tesla and BYD are racing each other to the bottom on cost and the top on performance, you get to benefit regardless of who wins. The price of battery packs has already dropped below $100 per kilowatt hour for the first time. That's the magic number where EVs become cheaper to produce than gas cars, and it's only going lower. Tesla's dry electrode alone cuts electrode manufacturing cost by nearly half. BYD's second-gen blade boosts energy density without raising material costs. Those improvements are already being passed on to you in the form of cheaper models and longer warranties. The cheapest BYD EV now starts at just under $8,000 in China. That's not a typo. $8,000 for a brand new electric car. You can't buy a used gas car that cheap in most markets. But there's a trap here, and it's the one I see so many potential buyers fall into. They read headlines about solid-state batteries and think, I'll just wait another year. The perfect battery is coming, then I'll buy. That's a mistake. The perfect battery has been coming next year for the last 15 years. Remember, when people said smartphones would never replace flip phones because the battery died too fast. That was 2007, and now your phone is glued to your hand. The same transition is happening with cars. Today's batteries last longer than your car loan. They last longer than most marriages. If you're waiting for solid state to buy an EV, you're like someone waiting for a color e-ink screen before buying a smartphone. You're not early, you're late. Meanwhile, the actual batteries on the market today are already better than what you'd need for a decade of driving. Tesla's 4680 cells, even without solid-state magic, can outlast the car's suspension and body. The Model 3 and Y have already demonstrated over 80% capacity retention. At 32,000 kilometers, that's 20,000 miles for the Americans. In real terms, that means the battery will probably live longer than the motor, which will live longer than the interior, which will live longer than your desire to own the same car. The average person keeps a new car for about 7 years. Today's EV batteries are designed to last 15 to 20, so waiting for a better battery is like waiting for a better microwave. Before you cook dinner, you're just delaying the meal. I want to pause here and ask you a question. We've covered dry electrodes, blade chemistry, semi-solids, and the storage war. But there's one piece of this puzzle I haven't mentioned. There's a battery chemistry that's cheaper than both Tesla's nickel-based dry cells and BYD's manganese-blended phosphate. It's already in production, but not in cars. Yet when it scales, it won't just change the EV landscape. It will change the entire economics of grid storage. I'm not going to name it here. I want you to think about it, or better yet, argue about it in the comments. What do you think it is? Sodium, zinc, something else? Drop your guess. I'll read them all. Now let's circle back to the durability angle, because this is where the consumer benefit gets really tangible. Battery life is the single biggest factor in an EV's resale value. If a 10-year-old EV still has 90% of its original range, its residual value is going to be much higher than a gas car of the same age, whose engine is already showing signs of wear. That's already happening. The Model Y 3-year-old resale value is over 54% in the US market. That's comparable to premium gas SUVs. And as the battery durability data keeps piling up, that number is only going to improve. In the past, people worried that buying an EV was like buying a phone. The battery degrades, and you're stuck with a worthless brick. That narrative is dead. The data shows that the average EV battery will outlast the average car ownership by a factor of 2. So you're not buying a disposable gadget. You're buying an asset that can be passed down, sold, or repurposed for home storage. And speaking of repurposing, that's another frontier that doesn't get enough attention. When an EV battery degrades to the point where it can't deliver the range a driver needs, it often still has 70 to 80% of its original capacity. That's plenty for stationary storage. Automakers are already building second life programs where old EV packs become grid batteries. Nissan's, BMW, and even Tesla have pilot projects. BYD has been doing it for years in rural China, powering villages with used bus batteries. So the useful life of a battery isn't 15 years. It's 25 or 30. If you count the second life, that changes the entire carbon footprint calculation. It's not just about emissions during driving. It's about total life cycle impact. And with recycling technologies improving, recovering over 95% of the lithium and cobalt, the circular economy for batteries is becoming real. That's why the European Union is already mandating minimum recycled content for new batteries by 2030. But let me bring it back to the competition, because that's what drives all this progress. The duel between Tesla and BYD is creating a virtuous cycle. When Tesla announced dry electrode production, BYD accelerated their second-generation blade. When BYD unveiled 5-minute charging, Tesla started talking about their own ultra-fast charging plans. Neither wants to be left behind, so they keep pushing each other. And the rest of the industry, CATL, Panasonic, LG, SK, they're all running faster just to keep up. This is the kind of market that produces miracle breakthroughs, not just in lab glassware, but in real factories. Now I have to address something that might be nagging at you. I've mentioned Tesla's engineering prowess and BYD's vertical integration. I've talked about semi-solid and solid state, but I haven't told you about the biggest wild card of all. There's a material that could replace lithium entirely, or at least reduce its usage by 90%. It's abundant, cheap, and works at room temperature in a completely different electrochemical mechanism. It's been in research for a decade. But in the last year, a handful of startups have raised huge rounds to commercialize it. If it works, it would make both lithium-ion and solid-state obsolete before they even hit their peak. I'm not going to spill that name right now either, but I'll give you a hint. It's not sodium and it's not zinc. Think even more common. Drop your theories in the comments. I'll do a dedicated video on that if enough of you ask for it. Let me end with a plot twist. BYD just signed a deal to supply batteries to Tesla's Shanghai Megapack factory. That's right, BYD, Tesla's biggest rival, is literally powering Tesla's energy business. So when you watch these two giants fight, remember, they're also secretly propping each other up. The real loser isn't either company, it's the oil industry. And the real winner, anyone who plugs in. But I want to know, who do you think builds a better cell? Drop your vote below. Team Dry Electrode or Team Blade Battery? I'll argue with you in the comments. So where does all this leave us? With a few clear takeaways. First, the battery war is not a binary contest. It's a multidimensional competition involving manufacturing, chemistry, supply chains, and infrastructure. Second, the winners will be the companies that can scale fast, not just invent clever stuff. Tesla's Dry Electrode is a perfect example of scaling innovation. BYD's Blade is a perfect example of materials innovation. Both have merit. Third, the consumer is the real victor. Prices are falling, performance is rising, and durability is extending far beyond what anyone predicted a decade ago. Fourth, and this is crucial, don't wait for the future. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Today's EVs, with today's batteries, are already good enough for 95% of driving. The remaining 5% will be covered by the rapid expansion of charging networks and the gradual arrival of semi-solid and eventually solid-state cells. But if you wait for perfection, you'll be waiting indefinitely. Let me leave you with a thought that might change how you see this whole industry. The last time we saw this kind of technology race, multiple companies pouring billions into overlapping solutions, it was the space race. And the winner of the space race wasn't the first nation to land on the moon. It was every human who got satellite TV, GPS, and weather forecasting as a byproduct. The same thing is happening here. Whether Tesla's Dry Electrode wins or BYD's Blade chemistry dominates, the spillover benefits will reach everyone. Cheap energy storage means cheaper electricity, more resilient grids, and less pollution. It means developing countries can leapfrog fossil infrastructure and go straight to renewables. It means your next phone will last a week on a charge, not a day. It means off-grid cabins and rural clinics can have reliable power without diesel generators. That's the real prize, not a quarterly sales crown, not a CEO's ego. The real prize is a world where energy is abundant, affordable, and clean. And we're already on that path, whether the winning logo is a Tesla T or a BYD badge. The gap between good enough and perfect is closing fast, and the only thing standing in the way is us. Our reluctance to let go of old habits, our fear of new tech, and our compulsion to wait for something better. But something better is already here. It's on the road right now, in the garage of your neighbor, and in the battery pack of that rideshare EV you took last week. The transition is happening. You get to decide whether you're a spectator or a participant. If you're reading this, you're already more informed than 99% of the population. So stop waiting, start driving. The revolution is electric, and it's battery-powered, and the best battery for you is the one that's available right now. At a price you can afford, with a warranty longer than you'll keep the car. That's not a compromise, that's a win. We've talked about dry electrodes, blade chemistry, semi-solid, solid-state, grid storage, second life, and even AI data centers. We've covered the physics, the chemistry, the economics, and the geopolitics. But the one thing I haven't told you is which company I'm personally betting on. That's because I don't have a horse in this race. I'm betting on the outcome, and the outcome is clear. Better, cheaper, longer-lasting batteries are coming. Not in some distant future, but in the cars you can buy today. So do yourself a favor, go test drive an EV, any EV. Feel the instant torque, the silent acceleration, the one-pedal driving. Then decide, not because you read a headline, but because you experienced it. That's the only truth that matters. I'll be in the comments arguing with all of you about whether sodium-ion will ever beat lithium, whether Tesla's 4680 can really achieve gigafactory scale yields, and whether BYD's flash charging network will ever expand beyond China. I want to hear your takes, I want to see your theories, and I want to see you challenge mine. That's how we all get smarter, so drop a comment, like this video if it helped you understand the future, and subscribe if you want to keep following this war as it unfolds. Because this is just the first chapter. The next one involves not just cars, not just grids, but the entire energy economy. And trust me, you don't want to miss that. See you in the next one.